Hi, welcome. Thank you for coming out tonight to talk together about keeping dogs out of shelters. And thank you to those who are joining us on Zoom as well. For full disclosure, this is being recorded for future playback. So just want to make sure everybody is aware of that. This is one of many canine community gatherings that we will be putting together. This is designed to bring communities together to talk about issues related to dogs and their welfare. And so we'll talk about things that exist in our communities and ways that we may be able to impact positively the lives of dogs. So before we get started, my name is Elizabeth Colson, and I am the founder of National Canine Advocacy Group. At National Canine, we believe that every dog deserves a good life. And this means a lot of different things to different people, but I think we can all agree that it is a truism that every dog deserves a good life. Our mission is to create social change in how dogs are perceived and treated everywhere. And the key to this is social change. And that's what we're all doing together here tonight. I think that it takes a village, which may be cliche, but I think it's true that in order to really impact the lives of dogs, we need to create social change around that. At National Canine, we do that in three different major ways. One, we start with community awareness, which is where we are today, and we do events all over. We've done actually a presentation in Texas recently, and so we are working with folks in lots of different communities, including the one we're in right now. We also work to advance public knowledge, and what this means is providing data and research and information that really is not out there. It's something that folks are not aware of. National Canine, we have built a database that references information that really is not pulled together by anyone. And so for us, we're really heavily focused on data and facts and looking at what the data tells us and how we can work with that. And then finally, using that data and the community awareness, we work to inform policymaking. And we're not lobbyists and we're not activists, but we do have relationships within the regulatory agency that oversees animal welfare in Colorado, pet animal welfare, and relationships with people that are in the legislature. And so we really can talk to folks about what sort of policy is coming down and provide our input as to what we think the data tells us related to that issue, and we either support what's presented or we do not, and we do that through testifying as part of the legislative process. So we spent a fair amount of the last couple of years working on legislation and regulations related to the welfare of animals. And that's something that we won't talk about tonight, but that policymaking is, of course, very important to creating social change. So what we came here to talk about, keeping dogs out of Colorado shelters and rescues. There are three ways that we can talk about this. And I think we need to start with how many dogs are we talking about? And then why do dogs end up in Colorado shelters and rescues? And what happens once they've entered the shelter system? And then finally, how can we make an impact on the dogs coming into the shelters, the dogs going out of the shelters, and what can we do about that? So starting with how many dogs we're talking about, anybody in the room have or online have a sense of how many dogs we're talking about? How many dogs are in Colorado shelters? Would you say it's less than 2,000 or between 2,000 and 5,000? Yeah, you think it's, yeah, or more than 5,000? Yes, those of you who said more than 5,000 are correct. This chart shows the number of animals or dogs, excuse me, that are in Colorado shelters at each of these periods. Now, the 2022 data doesn't come out until May or so of this year. So everything we're talking about is going to be through 2021. And I will hypothesize on what 2022 may look like. And we won't be sure, of course, until the data comes out. But what we're seeing here in this trend, the 7,331 dogs in Colorado shelters and rescues at the end of 2021, which is up 30% from 2018. There are myriad reasons why this would be the case, but it's actually pretty simple. There are more dogs going into shelters than there are dogs going out of shelters. Pretty simple. Intake, outcomes. So what you see in here is in 2019, there was an imbalance, and that's really what we're looking for here, is that if we have dogs entering the shelter, then we want to have them leaving the shelter in the same numbers, right? Otherwise, the number of dogs that are sitting in shelters is going to go up. And so you've got to manage the intake and the outcome. So in 2019, you can see that there was an imbalance of 650 dogs. And in 2020, that was 90. Now, this is probably a COVID item that you're seeing, but I won't go too far into COVID and its impact on animals. It obviously had a huge impact and to people as well. In 2021, though, we had a gap that was approaching 900 dogs. And you see in absolute terms, right, the number of dogs coming in and going out is going down, but the number that is out of balance is going up dramatically. I hypothesize that in 2022, what we will see is an increase in intake and an increase in this gap. And that's just based on things that I hear talking to shelters. I also volunteer at Foothills Animal Shelter and see, what's happening there. And so I think 2022 is going to look like something that we've never seen before. So why do dogs end up in Colorado shelters and rescues? And then what happens to them once they've entered the shelters? So the reasons for dogs coming into shelters from 2019 to 2021, so 3 years, 86,000, almost 87,000 dogs came in as strays. 53,000 were relinquished by their owners. And there's a whole lot to be said about what's behind that. And it's not something that we'll talk about tonight, but we'll talk about it in the future, gathering the details of why that happens and how that happens, and what we can do to impact owner relinquishment. The biggest piece in Colorado of the dogs that entered shelters are dogs that are transferred in from other states. Now, even though we've got an imbalance in intakes and outcomes, we still have in Colorado more demand for dogs than there are dogs available. And that's really a result of a strong spay and neuter program, which spay and neuter is another subject that has a lot of aspects to it that we'll talk about in another session. But the dogs that are in states that where there are more dogs than people are looking to take in, those dogs are transferred to states like ours where they have a better chance of being adopted. And you can see that that's the largest piece of this pie. As far as the outcomes go, vast majority of dogs who leave the shelter are adopted, 188,000. 59,000 are returned to owners. Now, one of the things that that you may notice here is that there were 86,000 strays and 59,000 were returned to owners. And so what you see here is the difference where a stray may not, maybe have been on the street for a long time, and the owner, just assumed that the dog was gone, or there are times where a dog is stray and the owner cannot be located. So the return to owner, there's a gap there between strays coming in and what's returned to owner, and some of that can be addressed by the community. During this 3-year period, there were 11,000 dogs that were euthanized. Now that's 4% of the outcome, which is to say 96% of the dogs that come into Colorado shelters leave the shelters either by being adopted, returned to their owner, or this is a category for other outcomes. That is an extraordinary number, 96% save rate. And so while it hurts to think about dogs being euthanized, again, another subject for a future time, but there are times when it is best for the dog, and I think we've all experienced that and can identify with that. And so we go back to every dog deserves a good life, and when a dog does not have a good life and does not have a chance at a good life, sometimes the answer is euthanasia. And so it's just the reality of working in this field. So what about COVID puppies? We hear a lot in the news about the shelters being full because people are bringing back dogs that they got in the 2020 lockdown, where people had gotten dogs to keep them company, or because they were working from home, they had more time for a dog that they had always wanted to have, and so the adoption rate was very high. I was like I said, I volunteer at Foothills Animal Shelter, and during 2020, once things opened up a little bit for us to start letting patrons in, there were times where there were 5 dogs, in the shelter, and 3 of them were on hold to be adopted. There just were no dogs. A lot of it was that they weren't coming in, but also every dog was getting adopted, which is great. And then the question becomes, did those dogs find a permanent home? Or did people find that once the lockdown was lifted, they may have had to go back to work? They're back in an office and can no longer really care for a dog the way that they want to or intended to. and so they resort to returning the dog to the shelter. There's no question that this has happened. I think it's really hard to know how much, what the percentage is, or how many of these dogs are coming back that we would call COVID puppies or COVID dogs, because when a dog is relinquished, the reason is self-reported by the person who's relinquishing the animal, and they don't always tell the truth. They may be embarrassed, ashamed that they couldn't take care of the dog, and so getting data from that is maybe sort of statistically meaningless. But just to look at the owner relinquishment trends from 19 to 21, you can see it's actually down in 21. It was down significantly in 2020 during the lockdown, and up a little bit in 2021. Based on what I'm hearing in the sheltering world, I think this the relinquishment numbers will go up. Dumb Friends League has, at one point, they were no longer taking owner surrenders, and I believe now they are doing surrenders by appointment only, and charging the public $25 to relinquish their animal. Aurora Animal Shelter stopped taking owner relinquishments, and I don't know if they've started taking them again or not. But the point is that what you see in the shelters is that they're trying to manage their population when it comes to owner relinquishment. So how can we start to make an impact, right? When we look at those pie charts, and there are more than 80,000 strays, we as a community can work to reduce the number of stray dogs. We'll talk about how to do that. Also, reducing the number of dogs that are surrendered by their owners. There are many reasons why people surrender their dog. A person may have passed away, and they don't have any provisions in their will or trust for the care of the animals. And so there isn't anyone designated to care for the animal. The family, for whatever reason, can't or won't care for the animal. And so it becomes surrender. But the biggest reason in looking at the data that animals are relinquished has to do with housing, and whether a person may move and is no longer allowed to have an animal, or a person's housing situation changes such that they can no longer have their dog. And there really, when it comes to all of this, we're talking about the human impact, right? All of this has to do with human behavior, and how, as humans and as communities, we sometimes let our dogs down, and that we can do something about that. The other item about surrendering dogs is that many times people will bring their dog in and surrender the dog because they say it's, air quotes, aggressive. And that may or may not, really be the right description for the dog. The owner just feels that way about it, and the owner may have not gotten some advice or some help on it, or they got some advice that It didn't seem to work. And so those surrenders also happen a lot, where I guess I would say an owner is exasperated with all they've tried to incorporate the dog into their family and that they haven't been successful. We can also increase the number of dogs that are returned to their owners. There are so many things that can be done here that are really just easy, and that's microchipping, making sure that your the area where your dog is secure. There's just a lot that can be done there, as well as when people have lost their dog, helping them know where to look. Sometimes people don't realize that. So, for example, a dog, a person may live in, I don't know, but a person may live in Wash Park and their dog ran away, but it got picked up in Jefferson County. So a person who lives in Denver, their dog gets picked up in Jefferson County and goes to Foothills Animal Shelter. The person who lives in Denver may not even think or know to look at shelters that are not close by. And I've actually had those conversations with people, and so I am certain that that situation exists. And so owners uh, can do more due diligence in finding their dogs, and I know that's the outcome that they want. So helping folks do that, increasing the number of dogs that are adopted, right? Most 68% of the dogs that leave Colorado shelters and rescues are adopted. And so there's nothing wrong with buying a dog from a responsible breeder or a responsible pet store, responsible being the key words there. But there are also dogs that need to be adopted. So if you or someone are looking to get a dog, think about adoption. And then we can make an impact by supporting local shelters and rescues. We can do that in several ways, supporting them financially, volunteering, advertising or reposting social media items that are important to you, or events that they're hosting, helping them get the word out about that. So there's a lot of things that can be done there. So for you, your mission, should you choose to accept it, is one, keep the microchip information up to date. If your dog has a microchip, but it has an old address, an old phone number, then the microchip doesn't do any good. And so you've got to keep that information up to date. Keep the areas where your dog is secure. If you've got a hole in your fence, repair the hole in your fence, or keep an eye on your dog while they're in the yard. Know where your dog is, and are they inside? Are they outside? Are they, where are they? And so where they are, and that means that they haven't run away and are on the streets. Of course, you can adopt a dog. Ask for help when you need it. This is where we're talking about owner surrenders, where people are just exasperated. They're at their wit's end, and they just don't know what else to do. And so there are resources out there. And in fact, National Canine is a resource in this regard, because we are able and love to work with folks who are really at that point where they don't know what else to do. And we can help them figure out what else to do. And it may be that a dog doesn't, fit with the family, and so it needs to find a new home. in which case our work is to rehome the dog. And this is something that we've done that can take some time, but it keeps the dog out of the shelter because the owner is taking the responsibility for the dog and finding it a new home. And we help them do that. Volunteer, that again is something that all shelters need. And they all need money or supplies. At Foothills, for example, if you've got old blankets that you don't use anymore, or towels, those are things they can use. And so think about how you might be able to take advantage of that and help folks out there. The most important thing that you can do, though, is to share your knowledge. Whether you've learned something new tonight, which I hope you have, or you have a great bit of knowledge that you can share, do it. Some of these things may seem intuitive, but not everybody thinks about the nitty-gritty details of this kind of thing. So share your knowledge. Let people know what you learned. When you hear people talking about different subjects that relate to animal welfare, if you have something to contribute. It goes back to the cliche of it takes a village, and you all are that village. And I thank you for being with us tonight. What questions are there? That's it. Oh, okay. Okay. You may not be able to hear that on Zoom. The question is, with the COVID puppies, how do you know whether they are whether dogs coming in are COVID puppies or not? I'm sorry. Did I capture your question? Yeah. Okay. Um, you don't know. It's something that again is captured in the media and with um, stories and social media about these dogs, all a bunch of them coming back, and I'm sure that's the case. I'm not sure that the absolute reason why we're seeing what we're seeing is COVID dogs. I think it's an easy answer that people can hang on to and identify with, but it's more complicated than that. Is what I would say. There's definitely an impact, but I think it's hard to say exactly how much of an impact. Does that answer your question? Good, good. What other? Okay, yeah, yeah. So there's a question in the room about the research that National Canine does, and that the research is based on, it's all public information. It's just that it's been scrubbed and scrubbed and combed through to get to information that is usable. So there's data that comes from the IRS. There's data that comes from the state agency responsible for pet animal care. It comes from a group called Shelter Animal Count, which is a national database where shelters report the intake and outcomes that we just looked at. And all of this research is actually pretty expensive. Even though it's public, it's not free. for example, the shelter animals count is $1,000 a quarter, so $4,000 a year for that data. So it's definitely not free, and so that gives me a chance to plug uh, our need for donations and our appreciation for such, because these things do cost money, and and your support means a lot in that if you can help out. Another question. Okay, no other questions. That's it. Thanks very much, everybody.